This is your no-nonsense recap for Bleach, the 1,000-Year Blood War Part 3, The Conflict. These recaps are fan-supported. If you find this recap helpful, drop a like and subscribe so you will never miss a full recap. Check the cards in the top right for a playlist of all of my recaps thus far. And before we watch the world collapse in Bleach, make sure that your spiritual pressure is fully locked in with a tub of anime girl thigh and a classic waifu shaker cup. Just use code SeaTactics at checkout to slash 10% off your gamer subs order and fuel your inner soul reaper. Thank you for watching. Episode 27 kicks off with, well, one hell of an opener. To let Senjumaru unleash her power, the rest of Squad Zero commit ritual suicide because their individual spiritual pressures are so massive that the universe can't handle them all at 100%. They had to link their souls to a seal. With the guys out of the picture, Senjumaru drops her Bankai, Shitatsu Kagagara Shigorami no Suji. Lille gets his attacks punched back into his torso, Askin gets crushed under iron spikes, Pernida gets swallowed by black sand, Gerard is frozen solid, and Haschwalth is left burning in a pillar of flame. Meanwhile, Ichigo strips Yhwach of his identity and renames him a black ant, treating him like an insect before casting a multi-century mausoleum to erase his soul from the cycle of rebirth. But the script completely flips. The 9-year timer runs out. Yhwach opens his eyes and unlocks the Almighty. He can see the future, and anything he sees can't harm him. In a flash, Ichigo goes from god tier to having his entire torso vaporized. The power-up flows down to Uryu. He activates his Vollständig, pulls off a brilliant switch to trap Senjumaru in her fabrics, and shoots a Heilig file clean through her heart. With Squad Zero wiped out, Yhwach walks up, shatters the seal, and manifests a flight of Reishi stars into the inner sanctum. By the time Ichigo and the crew crash land their elevator, they find Ichigo's severed head on the floor, but the monk pulls out one last miracle, using the power of names to siphon a fraction of Ichigo's energy just to stitch his body back together. He begs Ichigo to run to the throne room, warning that the Soul King is the only thing keeping reality from collapsing. And as Ichigo sprints up the stairs, we get that legendary smash cut down to Muken with Shunsui approaching a smirking Sosuke Aizen, right as Yhwach drives a Reishi sword straight into his father's chest. Episode 28 starts with Yhwach, who stands before the Soul King. We get a glimpse into the past, back when the Soul King used a ceremonial blade to split the primordial sea into 3 worlds we know today, before being mutilated, bound, and sealed away. Ichigo actually catches a vision while riding Orihime's platforms up to the palace, setting the tone for what's to come. By the time Ichigo and the crew confront Yhwach, the entire universe is starting to shake. Yhwach is sporting his triple-pupiled eyes, bragging that the future is already in the palm of his hand. But Ichigo isn't hearing it. He draws his duels on Getsu blades. Ichigo goes to work, he catches Yhwach with a Getsuga Tensho, slams him all the way down into Kirinji's hot springs, and shatters Yhwach's defensive barrier with a massive Getsuga Jujisho. For a second, it actually looks like Ichigo is winning. But the script flips. Yhwach stands up, cracks his neck, and reveals he was fighting with the Almighty deactivated the entire time. Once he turns the eyes back on, the fight becomes more or less a slaughter. He foresees every single path Ichigo takes, teleports behind his attacks, grabs him by the face, and blasts him straight through the floor of the Soul King's inner sanctum. While Ichigo is coughing up blood, Yhwach reveals the Soul King's true name is Adenis, a being who could see 1,000 years into the future, meaning he foresaw the extinction of the Quincy and chose to abandon them anyway. Down in the lab, Urahara tells this to Nanao, explaining that the Quincy were pushed to the brink of extinction twice just because their existence didn't fit into the force stabilization system of the world. But Ichigo still refuses to stay down. Orihime patches him up. Yoruichi tries to trap Yhwach in a network of spiritual wires, but Yhwach just burns them away with blue reishi flames. The burning curtains reveal the truth. The Soul King is suspended in mid-air, impaled by Yhwach's sword, but barely clinging to life. Ichigo immediately rushes in to pull the sword out and save him, and that is exactly where the trap snaps shut. The second Ichigo pulls the blade free, the Quincy blood hijacks his body. Veins burst across his arms and face, and Yhwach forces Ichigo's own muscles to swing the blade, slicing the Soul King clean in half. Yhwach laughs and reveals that the game was rigged from the very beginning. To fully break the Soul King's seal, he needed someone who was a perfect hybrid of a human, Shinigami, Quincy, Fullbringer, and of course, Hollow. Ichigo's entire life, his entire awakening, was actually just engineered for this exact moment of execution. As a massive wave of energy explodes across all three realms, sending Karakura Town and the Sarete into total chaos, Urahara drops the final bomb. Existence itself is about to dissolve into nothingness. Episode 29 pivots hard into one of the more tragic and emotional sacrifices in Bleach. Jushiro Ukitake steps up in Urahara's lab. He drops his captain's coat and reveals a vertical eye on his back. He's initiating Kamikake, a forbidden ritual to offer up his own body to take the dead Soul King's place. To understand why this is happening, we dive into Ukitake's past. At just 3 years old, he was dying of an incurable lung disease. His desperate parents prayed to a local deity called Mimihagi, which stepped in and claimed Ukitake's diseased lungs to keep him alive. As he grew up, entered the academy, and became best friends with Kyoraku, that illness never left him. Shunsui eventually connected the dots using old noble family rumors. Mimihagi isn't just a random god, it is the literal right hand of the Soul King, the limb that governs stagnation and stillness. Ukitake knew his entire life was borrowed time, saved for this exact moment. But in the present, stagnation spreads from Ukitake's lungs to his organs, completely consuming him as darkness erupts from his eyes and mouth. A massive shadow hand shoots into the sky, wrapping around the two severed halves of the Soul King and temporarily halting the collapse of reality. Upstairs, Yhwach gets completely blindsided. Because Mimihagi is a literal piece of the Soul King, it exists as a total blind spot to the Almighty. Yhwach tries to look into its future, and his multiple pupils literally crack under the strain. But down in the lab, Soifan says this stabilization is entirely temporary, lasting only as long as Ukitake's heart keeps beating. Knowing they're running out of time, Shunsui decides it's time to pull the wild card. He heads deep down into the abyss of Muken to confront Sosuke Aizen. Shunsui has 20 keys to Aizen's restraints, but is only permitted to use 3, starting by unlocking his mouth. But Aizen is so overwhelmingly broken that just freeing his mouth allows him to casually break his own eye and ankle restraints through a sheer flex of spiritual pressure. Shunsui shows the key to escape is surgically embedded in his own heart. If Aizen kills him, the gates shut forever. To prove just how dangerous he still is, a guard gets close to bind him, and Aizen's raw, condensed Reiatsu instantly vaporizes the man's fingertips. Aizen asks if Shunsui really thinks he's going to play hero for the Soul Society, but Shunsui just smiles. They don't need to be friends, their interests just happen to line up. Episode 30 opens with the culmination of Ukitake's sacrifice as the Kamikake ritual claims his body, turning him into the right arm of the Soul King. As darkness pours from his eyes and mouth, a massive shadow hand shoots into the royal realm and temporarily halts the collapse of reality. Yhwach is stunned, realizing that because Mimihagi is part of the Soul King, it exists as a blind spot to the Almighty. Seizing the moment, Ichigo shatters the blute on his arm to intercept Yhwach, forcing him to drop his weapon, while Yoruichi rushes past to deploy a Sonkatsu no Jufu barrier to solidify Mimihagi as the new anchor of the worlds. But just as victory seems within reach, Uryu begins sneaking up and shooting a Heilig file directly into Yoruichi's back. This shatters her concentration, causing the stabilization barrier to explode. With the defense now compromised, Yhwach bypasses Ichigo. Yoruichi tries to retaliate with destructive spheres, but Yhwach commands Pernida to mutilate her left arm before blasting her off the side of the palace. Yhwach then rips Mimihagi right off the Soul King, causing the palace to split and list, while Shutswaffle converge on Orihime, Sado, and Ganju. Even though Ganju manages to temporarily trap the elites in a massive sinking sandpit, they reactivate their partial Volstendigs and fly back out unfazed. Meanwhile, the confrontation between Ichigo and Uryu devolves into a clash of ideals. Uryu has new abilities, firing dozens of arrows out of the mere wake of his hand movements before trapping Ichigo in a massive Lichtregen that blasts him through the floor. When a stray arrow grazes Ichigo's face, his own Quincy heritage shields him, allowing him to catch Uryu off guard and pin him by the collar. Ichigo begs him to stop, but Uryu doubles down, explaining that after reading Soken's journal, he can never forgive the Shinigami for the 1,000-year slaughter of his people. Uryu unleashes his Volständig, sprouting fletchet wings overwhelming Ichigo. Ichigo fires a massive Getsuga Jujisho, but intentionally lets it veer off to spare his friend's life. Exploiting this, Uryu coldly draws his bow and fires a point-blank arrow that punches a massive hole straight through Ichigo's side. Mimihagi attempts one last crackle of electricity to hold Yhwach back, but mocks its inferior power and rips its eye apart, causing Ukitake's body to writhe in the lab. Standing before the defenseless Soul King, Yhwach commands the Schutzwaffel to lend him their strength, coalescing their reishi blades into a massive broadsword. With one swing, he shatters the crystal and begins absorbing the Soul King directly. It's revealed a kneeling Yhwach consumed by darkness with a swarm of multiple eyes sprouting all over his face. With a literal nightmare pouring from the heavens, alarm bells flash across the monitors in Urahara's laboratory as Yhwach shatters the Sheikon Maku barrier, dissolving into millions of eyeball creatures that begin chewing on the Shinigami. Soifan rushes outside and levels her Bankai, but before she can fire the missile, she is swallowed by the tide. Hisagi, Ikkaku, and Yumichika release their Shikai to defend the lab, and Byakuya unleashes a horde of blade petals, but the volume of the swarm overwhelms their defenses. Suddenly, the wave is instantaneously crushed into paste by a dense wall of spiritual pressure, revealing Sosuke Aizen casually sitting in his chair, criticizing the Shinigami for fighting with their swords instead of their Reiatsu. As the Shinigami demand to know why he is free, Kyoraku steps forward to take responsibility, silencing the protests of Renji and Ikkaku that honor will not save the world, and using evil to defeat evil is not an evil act. Aizen requests to have his hand restraints undone so he can stand up, but Shunsui refuses, leaving an annoyed Aizen to handle the next horde as Shunsui walks away. Aizen's Reiatsu unleashes a massive black coffin that leaves the place flattened. Watching from the lab, Urahara and Renji realize the truth. Despite being locked away in the abyss of Muken, Aizen's power has somehow grown stronger than it was during his battle with Ichigo. Amused that his chair withstood the blast, Aizen notes that the gravity from his spell cracked the canopy and confidently offers to shoot down the Soul King Palace with a beam of his Reiatsu. His energy pierces, but right as it begins to intensify, his power vanishes as Kurotsuchi steps onto the rooftop, mocking Aizen for underestimating the SRDI development and explaining that his restraints are designed to compress and control Aizen's spiritual output. Seizing on his sudden restriction, Nana ambushes Aizen, targeting the natural holes in his Reiatsu to paralyze him in his chair. A faction of surviving Sternritter arrive alongside a horde of zombified Shinigami, but in a twist, Bazz-B brutally shoots Nana through the chest. Realizing Yhwach has abandoned them to die, Bazz-B proposes an alliance. The remaining Quincy will keep other enemies at bay if the Shinigami transport them up to the palace so they can execute their former king. With time running out, Shunsui accepts the terms and broadcasts a citywide order commanding all able-bodied personnel to gather at the SRDI to pool their energy for Urahara's replica gate. Mayuri raises a launch platform, while Issei stands her ground against Kenpachi Zaraki, convincing him to stop looking for Yachiru and lend his power. Sarugaki and the Vizards arrive with a liquid harvested from world distortions to fuel the gate, though Urahara warns that this is a one-way trip with no guarantee of a return. Meanwhile, Ichigo bolts awake screaming Uryu's name, finding himself healed alongside Yoruichi by an exhausted Orihime. Kon reveals he barely survived catching Ichigo by inflating his own body, earning a rare thank you. Before the group can figure out how to to get back to the royal realm without being spotted, Yoruichi opens a Garganta and a smiling Grimmjow steps through to greet a Ichigo. Simultaneously, the energy surrounding Yhwach settles and Haschwalth proclaims the birth of a new world. Episode 32 kicks off atop the platform raised by Mayuri, where Urahara instructs the Shinigami and Sternritter to channel their Reiatsu into glass orbs to manifest the gateway. In the laboratory, technicians panic as an anomaly shakes the Serete. Outside, the buildings of the Wahrwelt city are stripped away and lifted into the sky by a black eye-bearing substance. Hirako and Soifan marvel at the Quincy's power. Seeing their gate turn translucent under the strain, Urahara urges everyone to hurry. Meanwhile, in the royal realm, Yoruichi opens a Garganta revealing a grinning Grimmjow. Grimmjow draws his Zanpakuto to settle his score with Ichigo, only to be interrupted when Lille in her adult form slam hugs Ichigo, explaining that Urahara made a special bracelet allowing her to voluntarily switch forms, to which I say, yippee! As Orihime blushes, Grimmjow and Lille bicker over the former Espada ranks until Riruka and Yukio appear inside a box-shaped elevator created by Yukio's Fullbring. Once everyone boards, the elevator locks, and a defeated Ichigo realizes he was the last person to be told about this secret alliance. Yoruichi and Yukio explain that they used Riruka's dollhouse to shrink a pocket of space known as a Valley of Screams inside the box, allowing them to travel through the Garganta without emitting Reiatsu, setting up a perfect near surprise. But back in the Serete, the main gate begins to break down as Nanao realizes they lack the built-up Reiatsu reservoir of Ukitake. However, Lisa, Sarugaki, Hachijin, and Aikawa arrive to contribute their power, while Mayuri deploys a golden Reiatsu amplifier to boost everyone's energy, successfully stabilizing the gate into a gigantic Senkaimon. Inside the rising elevator, Yoruichi instructs Ichigo to unleash his most powerful Getsuga Tensho the moment they land at the stake she previously left near the Soul King, while Grimmjow admits he is only helping because Hueco Mundo will be erased if Yhwach wins. Simultaneously, Uryu stands before Yhwach, who reveals a new appearance. The upper half of his face is completely consumed by darkness and a swarm of blinking, misshapen eyes. As Askin recoils, Yhwach overflowing power fractures the Soul King Palace, lifting chunks of stone into the sky before weaving the 5 cities together with blue energy. Kneeling, Haschwalth begs to lead them into the new era. As the elevator nears its destination, Yukio and Riruka announce they will stay behind to manage the extraction, refusing to risk their lives further. Though Ganju protests, Ichigo validates their choice, thanking Riruka for forcing her dollhouse to adapt to an ugly Valley of Screams just to save them. In the Serete, Mayuri's technicians initiate the final sequence, allowing Shunsui to lead the captains, lieutenants, visors, and Sternritter through the gate. However, both groups are stunned to emerge not in the royal palace, but right in the middle of a reassembled Wahrwelt city surrounded by darkness. Urahara and Yoruichi quickly realize that Yhwach has pulled the Quincy capital from the Serete and rebuilt it over the ruins of the Soul King Palace. Suddenly, Yoruichi's younger brother, Yushiro, detects her Reiatsu and attempts to leap to her, but plummets out of the sky. Renji catches him as Byakuya points out a new trap. The enemy has seized control of all Reiatsu in the atmosphere, making it impossible for the Shinigami to form footholds. Despite the environmental disadvantage and Soifan noting the absence of the Soul King's Reiatsu, Shunsui senses that Ichigo's group is alive and orders the 13 to march forward to install a new deity. Suddenly, the structure convulses as a massive, sweeping tower bearing Silburn at its peak erupts from the central platform, inviting the invaders for an attack. Inside the fortress, Yhwach sits atop a throne shaped like a hoggle ruined, formally naming his new stronghold Wahrwelt. I don't know how to pronounce that. Sorry. And the foundation for the one and only true world, Haschwalth kneels before their Yhwach, vowing to slaughter Ichigo and the 13 to secure the future. Episode 33 opens with the soaring fortress of Wahrwelt fully raised, prompting Yhwach and Haschwalth to command the Schutzwaffel to give the invading Shinigami a warm welcome so their spilled blood can fill a celebratory chalice. Utilizing the gates of the sun underneath their feet, the elite teleport across the shifting city. Below, Kyoraku leaves leads the captains, lieutenants, and visors forward while Bazz-B and Lille and Gazelle branch off to pursue their own vengeance against Yhwach. Concurrently, Ichigo's group races along an adjacent path, unaware that Mayuri and Nemu have saltered their gate coordinates to conduct research away from the main army. This backfires when Kenpachi, Ikkaku, Yumichika, and Hanataro accidentally follow them through the gate after Kenpachi took a poorly timed bathroom break, resulting in a little bit of a bickering as they sprint into the Reishi dense area. As Ichigo's group struggles with the inability to form Reishi footholds or communicate, Grimmjow bolts ahead and blindsides Askin. Askin emerges unharmed and flees, openly admitting his preference for underhanded, sneaky assassinations over head-on combat. Grimmjow partially unleashes his Pantera, transforming his hands into claws. Desperate, Askin retaliates by tossing a gift ball that detonates in Grimmjow's face and paralyzed on the ground, though Ichigo draws Zangetsu to intervene. Elsewhere, Lille uses his spirit weapon, Diagram, to snipe the separating group. Lille fires straight through Hisagi's upper arms and chest. The dispersion brings Renji face to face with Uryu, who blankets the street in a volley. Deflecting the barrage with his sealed Zanpakuto, Renji releases his Zabimaru, only for Uryu to proclaim that the Shinigami have no future against Yhwach's power and vows to finish off Ichigo next time. Infuriated, Renji unleashes his Bankai to extend a massive, serrated arm blade that blasts Uryu through the air before slamming him through a stone spire. Renji heats his blade until it turns red hot, melting through 3 buildings and safely weather Uryu's barrage. Capitalizing on momentum, Renji uses the blade to hurl a brick at Uryu, craters him into a wall, and makes him go boom. To Renji's shock, Uryu emerges from the smoke unscathed, immediately attacking. When Renji tries to push forward, Uryu blankets him in a barrage of hundreds of fletched arrows. Renji counters by sprouting copies of Hihiho from the discarded fur patches to restrain Uryu. Flaring his Reiatsu, Renji reflects on his training under Ichibe, who taught him that unleashing his Bankai's true form requires a 20-second energy infusion. Renji spins his bone tail like a flail to unleash Zagai Zeko, yet Uryu counters to absorb the ruined Reishi, fully restoring himself before trapping Renji. The 5 electrified rods siphon Renji's Reiatsu, reverting his Zanpakuto back to its sealed state. In a desperate gamble, a spectral, skeletal manifestation of Hihiho rips from Renji's arm to fire a small Hikotsu Taiho, but Uryu effortlessly tears through the blast, punching a hole straight through Renji's chest and leaving him defeated. Episode 34 kicks off in the blood-soaked streets of Wahrwelt as Renji collapses after taking an arrow through the chest from Uryu. While Uryu stands coldly over his former ally and Lille watches from above, the remaining Soul Reapers push toward the central palace. Meanwhile, Kenpachi and the others run into a roadblock in the form of Pernida. Mayuri wastes no time mocking Kenpachi's intelligence, prompting Kenpachi to do what he does best: charge in blindly with zero chill. Pernida's hidden power mangles Kenpachi's right arm into a bloody pretzel, proving he's a total madman. Kenpachi rips his arm off at the shoulder to stop the corruption. Stubborn to a fault, he charges right back in, only for his legs to shatter as Pernida's invisible nerves twist his body. Before he can be pulverized, Mayuri steps in and stabs Kenpachi from behind with his paralyzing Shikai, benching the brute for his own good. With Kenpachi now benched, Mayuri takes center stage and breaks down the enemy's power. Pernida uses its own nerves to hijack and control anything they touch. Mayuri splashes a vial of acid on the incoming nerves, forcing them to retract, but the real shocker comes next. Pernida tears off its cloak, revealing its true form: a grotesque, giant left hand with a dual-pupiled eye on its palm, the literal left arm of the Soul King. Thrilled to have a test subject, Mayuri matches its attacks step for step. Pernida extends its nerves into inorganic matter to summon massive stone hands that seemingly crush Mayuri, but he emerges unscathed thanks to his explosive reactive armor and custom shoes that let him stand on air. Meanwhile, just outside the fortress, the Quincy Civil War heats up as Lille and Giselle head off to assassinate Yhwach, leaving Bazz-B to settle his personal blood blood feud with Haschwalth. Back in the trenches, Mayuri blows off Pernida's pinky finger to take a sample. But the script flips again when an eye opens on the severed pinky, shooting nerves into Mayuri's right arm. Showing insane composure, Mayuri uses his left hand to perform frantic, one-handed self-surgery to rearrange his own muscles and blood vessels on the fly. Worst yet, the severed pinky rapidly evolves into a full-sized clone of Pernida. When Pernida rips off another finger to breed a second clone, Mayuri realizes he is facing the embodiment of evolution. Realizing standard tactics just won't cut it, Mayuri unleashes his modified Bankai. His blade births a massive, grotesque infant that splits its own stomach open to produce a skinless, screaming monster with its nerves completely exposed on the outside. Pernida tries to hijack the creature, but Mayuri reveals the ultimate counter. His new creation has 70,000 layers of skin, meaning Pernida's nerves can only peel away one layer at a time. Completely immune to the control, the giant infant charges forward and devours Pernida and its clones whole. As his custom Bankai lets out a massive burp, Mayuri cackles madly over a victory while Nemu watches silently from the sidelines. Just as Mayuri celebrates his modified Bankai devouring Pernida, the dynamic shifts. The giant baby bulges and rips open from within. Further away, Shunsui and Shinji sense the massive spiritual pressure drop. Before they can fully process the danger, Lille snipes Shunsui from a massive distance, seemingly blasting a hole straight through his chest, but it's a clever trap. Shunsui uses his Shikai, stepping through a shortcut of energy to appear directly behind a shocked Lille and slicing his gun. Nanao briefly catches up, but Shunsui commands her to group back up with Shinji and run ahead. Left alone, Shunsui utilizes a series of shadow games and illusionary after images to confuse Lille, breaking his weapon again and impaling him through his own shadow. However, Lille reveals his true trump card. By opening both eyes, he unlocks his intangibility, causing Shunsui's blade to pass harmlessly through his liquid-like flesh. Lille then unleashes his ultimate transformation, sprouting 8 wings and raining down a barrage that leaves Shunsui heavily wounded and bleeding. Shunsui tries to retaliate with a powerful spell, but it does 0 damage. Meanwhile, the battlefield shifts to Ichigo, who finds himself locked in a standoff with Askin. Askin deduces that Ichigo's special training in the royal palace is protecting him from environmental poisoning. Realizing a direct brawl is a bad idea, Askin decides to adjust his flavor, pulling out a handful of poisonous spheres. Back at the main fight, Shunsui realizes he is at the end of his rope. He retreats to the edge of the city to keep his allies safe and activates his Bankai, plunging the entire battlefield into a despair-filled aura. Lille sprouts deer-like legs and tries to obliterate the area, but Shunsui's Bankai forces them both to act out a multi-act tragic play. The first act shares all of Shunsui's wounds directly onto Lille's body. The second act infects Lille with a highly contagious and curable disease that makes him bleed from his face. The third act submerges them both in a bottomless, icy zone where they drown together until their energy is totally drained. Inside the abyss, Shunsui's Zanpakuto spirit manifests to comfort him. For the final act, Shunsui winds a white thread around Lille's neck, cleanly decapitating the Quincy and sending his headless body plunging into the abyss. Coughing up blood, Shunsui collapses into his spirit's lap, securing a victory by the skin of his teeth. Just as Mayuri cackles over his modified Bankai eating Pernida, Pernida bursts out of the giant infant's stomach, regrows its missing fingers, and reveals its vocabulary is rapidly evolving. Pernida rains down arrows laced with homing nerves, forcing Mayuri to blow off his own arm to escape the infection. When another barrage traps him, Nemu leaps in without orders, using her own arm as a shield and severing it before the nerves can spread. Mayuri berates her for risking her life, reminding her she is his 7th generation creation and doesn't have the freedom to die by her own judgment. I know I'm supposed to be no nonsense up in this bitch, but can I just say Nemu deserves much better than Mayuri? I mean, really, honestly, guys, gals, I treat Nemu right, just saying. After patching their limbs up with a flesh regenerating agent, Mayuri coats the area in a dense anesthetic and orders Nemu to inject a nerve freezing agent directly into Pernida's arrows. The poison successfully freezes Pernida and one clone, forcing the remaining clone to cut off its own thumb to survive. In a twist, the clone begins speaking exactly like Kenpachi, absorbing data from everything its nerves touches. It sheds its frozen skin using the exact layered skin defense it stole from Mayuri's own modified Bankai. Meanwhile, down in the laboratory, Akon uncovers the dark history of Mayuri's artificial soul project. He reveals that iterations 1 through 3 were complete failures. The 4th was just a brain, the 5th powered Mayuri's Bankai modifications, and the 6th died at just 2 years old from cellular decay. Nemu is the absolute culmination of Mayuri's dream, a creation that eats, grows, and evolves on its own from nothing. Back in the trenches, Nemu takes the initiative to protect her creator. Rocketing forward, she smashes a hole clean through Pernida's palm, pushing her physical limits to the absolute brink. She sacrifices 6% of her soul to fire an energy blast that completely vaporizes the Pernida clone, but the horror returns pretty much instantly. The scattered chunks of the clone sprout eyes, hijack Nemu's body with nerves, and violently blows her to pieces. As Mayuri stands stunned amidst her remains, a hallucination appears to mock him, claiming a true scientist should celebrate the death of an imperfect creation. Mayuri snaps, crushes the illusion, and admits he let his own arrogance blind him. Pernida's clone steps up to feast on Nemu's flesh. Mayuri dives straight into its mouth to rescue Nemu's brain, leaving Pernida to swallow her pituitary gland. The gland contains a hyper-accelerated cell division organ regulated entirely by the brain. Without the brain to control it, Pernida's cells multiply so violently that the godlike hand undergoes total cellular collapse and explodes into a bloody mist. A battered Mayuri collapses after a surviving nerve mangles his legs. Ikkaku and Yumichika carry him to a hidden room where they find a zombified Toshiro and Rangiku completely cured. Mayuri seals himself and Kenpachi into preservation pods to heal, clutching Nemu's brain and reveling in the fact that he has finally surpassed Urahara. Finally, the perspective shifts to Stillburn. Lil Toto and Giselle are ambushed by enemy soldiers, prompting Giselle to summon their zombified squad, Bombietta, Menines, and Candace to tear through the horde. But the fallen soldiers stand right back up, sporting Yhwach's eyes. Simultaneously, Haschwalth sends troops to Uryu, but Bazz-B ambushes them from the shadows, stepping out to confront his former best friend and to settle their final blood feud. The relief of decapitating Lille vanishes in an instant. Lille's headless body teleports into the air as his flesh regenerates into a golden, owl-like divine entity, declaring himself God's immortal messenger. Lille fires a beam of light that tears through Shunsui's stomach, deactivating Shunsui's Bankai and leaving him heavily bleeding. As Shunsui's Zanpakuto spirits begs him to flee and rest, his lieutenant and now arrives on the battlefield. She demands Shunsui hand over her hidden Zanpakuto, urging him to break the sacred promise he had made to her deceased mother. Using his shadow jumping ability to evade Lille's tracking, Shunsui pulls Nanao into the safety of the shadows and finally unveils the story of her lineage. The Issei family is a strictly matrilineal clan of priests where any man who marries into the family is doomed to a premature death. Nanao's mother tried to break the cycle by marrying Shunsui's older brother, but he had passed away shortly after. Desperate to protect Nanao from inheriting the family's fate, her mother begged Shunsui to hide their sacred ritual sword. Shunsui complied, forcing his own Zanpakuto spirit to birth a second spirit entirely for the sake of keeping the weapon hidden away. Central 46 ultimately executed Nanao's mother for losing the sacred treasure. Years later, Nanao joined Shunsui's division after recognizing him wearing her mother's distinct hairpins. Now, refusing to let her mother sacrifice mean fleeing from destiny, Nanao proudly accepts the curse and takes the sword. Nanao leaps from the shadows to unveil the clan's heirloom, Shinken Hankyoken. It's a bladeless, paddle-shaped ritual sword that cannot cut human flesh, but holds a singular absolute trait. It reflects the power of gods. Nanao blindsides Lille, severing his left hand in an explosion of reflected light. Enraged and realizing the danger, Lille shapes a massive spear of energy into a giant trumpet above his head, unleashing his ultimate judgment, Trumpet. Terrified and wounded by the stray shockwaves, Nanao begins to freeze up on the rooftop. Shunsui emerges from her shadow, placing his hand over hers to steady her grip and shoulder the family burden together. As Lille fires the city-erasing blast, Nanao holds the mirror sword high. Shinken Hankyoken absorbs the divine energy and reflects it directly back at its source, completely shattering Lille's immortal body into a harmless shower of golden feathers and rain. Ha! With Lille finally eradicated, a thoroughly exhausted Shunsui catches a stumbling Nanao, collapsing into a sitting position to finally take a well-deserved breath. The decades of hidden resentment finally boil over in the replaced city of Wahrwelt. Bazz-B confronts his childhood friend Haschwalth, demanding to know how he could blindly serve the tyrant who triggered the holy selection and wiped out their remaining comrades left behind. Bazz-B reveals he was rejected by the selection and aims to kill Haschwalth tonight, capitalizing on the moment Yhwach sleeps and swaps his powers with Haschwalth. Bazz-B unleashes his fiery burning finger technique, turning the castle floors into raging lava and forcing Haschwalth to defend himself with an energy shield. The battle unearths a 1,000-year history between the two. As kids, Bazz-B was a self-proclaimed Quincy prodigy who could manifest a spirit crossbow, while Haschwalth was a failure who couldn't even collect spiritual energy or forge a weapon. After Yhwach's elite guards slaughtered Bazz-B's family and burned his castle to the ground, the two boys survived in the woods, training relentlessly for a shared goal: to get close enough to assassinate Yhwach. Years later, when Yhwach formed the Stern Ritter to invade the Soul Society, Bazz-B confidently stepped up to enlist, but Yhwach bypassed the prodigy entirely, pinning the crowd with his immense pressure and choosing Haschwalth as his right hand and other half. When Haschwalth tried to refuse the position to give it to Bazz-B, Yhwach exposed the reality. Haschwalth belonged to a rare breed of Quincy born once every few decades who cannot absorb spiritual energy. Instead, his true power is to unconsciously share his strength with those around him. Bazz-B's lifelong genius talent wasn't his own. It was fueled by Haschwalth's passive gift. Blinded by rage and some betrayal, a young Bazz-B fired an arrow at Yhwach, but Haschwalth caught it. In the present, history repeats itself flawlessly. Haschwalth catches Bazz-B's fiery arrows in the exact same manner and delivers a brutal slash across his stomach. Refusing to back down, Bazz-B ignites Burner Finger 4, forming a massive blade of fire. But Haschwalth moves like a flash and cleanly severs Bazz-B's arm at the shoulder. Bleeding heavily and running on pure willpower, Bazz-B bets everything on his ultimate technique. He channels his remaining fire into all 5 fingers, unleashing Burning Full Fingers, a colossal swirling cone of absolute incinerating flame. Haschwalth charges directly through the inferno unscathed, delivering a decisive slash across Bazz-B's chest. As the heat fades, a dying Bazz-B stumbles forward, grabs Haschwalth's lapel, and smiles. He admits defeat, noting that losing to his old friend doesn't feel nearly as bad as he thought it would. Bazz-B collapses and dies on the blood-soaked floor, closing his eyes to the memory of their childhood promise to become the strongest Quincy together. And a somber Haschwalth sheathes his broadsword and walks away into the shadows. While Yhwach sleeps, Haschwalth awakens the multi-pupiled eyes of the Almighty. He corners Uryu at the Gate of the Sun, using his newly transferred foresight to pressure the young Quincy into exposing his true allegiance. Outside the castle, the advancing Shinigami forces are intercepted by Gerard Valkyrie. Renji arrives on the scene, recovered, flashing back to how the Vizards discovered him near death and healed his wounds. To prevent a prolonged fight, Byakuya uses his blade petals to brutally shred Gerard's upper torso, leaving him in a pool of blood. Instead of dying, Gerard triggers his unique ability, the Miracle. He converts all physical damage into godly size, morphing into a colossal giant. He completely overwhelms the battlefield, brushing off coordinated attacks from Shinji, Hinamori, Byakuya, even Soifan's Bankai. On a nearby rooftop, Askin isolates Ichigo, Orihime, and Sato using his ability, the Death Dealing. He creates a poison field that lowers their tolerance to spiritual energy, leaving them completely paralyzed. Yoruichi ambushes Askin to save the group, shredding her top to activate a lightning-infused bodysuit technique that levels the area. Her naive younger brother, Yushido, suddenly joins the fray, blindly unleashing a massive fire explosion that seemingly just incinerates everything. The celebration is short-lived. Askin emerges from the smoke entirely unharmed. The death dealing grants him total immunity to any spiritual energy he ingests in large quantities. Having perfectly adapted to Yushido's specific energy signature, Askin casually fires 3 spirit arrows directly through the boy's chest, leaving Yoruichi to panic over her brother's body. As the battle rages, massive earthquakes fracture the dimensions from Hueco Mundo to the human world. The strain shatters Jushido Ukitake's shadow tendril structure back into the Serete, leaving him writhing in agony while a smiling Yhwach overflows with dark energy. Orihime manages to completely heal Ichigo and Sato, allowing them to break away and sprint toward the inner palace. Inside the halls, Haschwalth draws his broadsword to forcefully test Uryu's loyalty, unleashing an attack that blasts Uryu straight through a wall, landing him directly in front of a shocked Ichigo down in the human world. Isshin tracks down Ryukin in a quiet graveyard, asking if he finally intends to join the war. With his broadsword drawn, Haschwalth demands that Uryu execute his friends on the spot to prove his absolute loyalty to the Quincy King. To force Uryu's hand, Haschwalth unveils his triple-pupiled eyes, revealing that the Almighty allows him to see every future movement. Uryu activates his spirit armor and initiates a fierce clash with Ichigo, aggressively locking blades to keep his true motives hidden from Haschwalth's watchful gaze. A history of defiance drives Uryu's actions. Uryu flashes back to reading his grandfather Soken's secret journal, which exposed Yhwach as a tyrant who executed the Haschwalth to rob other Quincy of their powers and lives to heal himself. The selection killed Uryu's mother, Katagiri, after she collapsed outside the hospital. Soken's writings revealed that the surviving Quincy bore the ultimate responsibility to stop Yhwach's madness. Uryu built trust within the Vaudenreich through calculated battles for one sole purpose: to infiltrate and dismantle the Empire from the inside. Back in the battle, Ichigo unleashes a massive wave of energy, erasing an entire section of the castle to create clouds of debris. Using the smaller blade of his Zanpakuto as a distraction, Ichigo blindsides Uryu, slamming him into a crumbling pit below. Away from Haschwalth's immediate gaze, Uryu pulls out a sun key and hands it to Ichigo. He reveals that a gate of the sun 5 levels down is set for an invasion of the human world and instructs Ichigo to use it to escape while he stays behind to destroy Wahrwelt. When Ichigo furiously demands to know why Uryu has to bear this burden alone, Uryu declares that this is a duty only he can fulfill as the bearer of Soken and Katagiri's blood. Haschwalth intercepts them, revealing he foresaw the betrayal and has already destroyed the gateway. However, Uryu quickly exposes a vital vulnerability to Ichigo. Yhwach is currently defenseless at the top of the castle because his foresight is entirely transferred to Haschwalth while he sleeps. Uryu forces Ichigo to turn down the throne room, turning back to face Haschwalth alone. When Haschwalth claims the future cannot be altered, Uryu proudly draws his bow, noting that Haschwalth's sheer surprise proves the Almighty is far from omnipotent. While the primary conflict reaches a boiling point, the rest of the battlefield descends into chaos. Lil Toto and Gazelle lead the zombified remains of the female Sternritter in a desperate ambush against Yhwach. However, their luck turns tragic. Yhwach turns out to be awake and effortlessly cuts them all down, flooding the chamber with dark energy. The gargantuan Gerard smashes his way through the city, cornering a wounded Hinamori. Shinji and Visor don their hollow masks to intercept the giant. The scattered remnants of Lille rain down into the Soul Society as golden bird-like monsters. The heavily scarred Izuru Kida returns to the battlefield, utilizing his gravity doubling blade to systematically bisect the creatures. As Ichigo's group races towards their final battle, a portal opens outside Wahrwelt. Stepping through a decades-old gateway, Isshin Kurosaki and Ryukin Ishida finally arrive on the battlefield, armed with the legacy of Soken's past to tip the scales of the war. Can I just say that this season of Bleach was freaking awesome? Need to get caught up with an anime? Check out this playlist for all of my full series recaps here. Make it a great day or not, the choice is yours.